Nichomachean Ethics by Aristotle. Book 1I. Every art, every inquiry, every pursuit is considered to have a purpose in seeking some form of good. Medicine aims for health, shipbuilding for a vessel, and economics for wealth. In each case, the end goal is always considered more important than the activity itself. So, wouldn't understanding what the good is have a significant impact on our lives? Like archers aiming at a target, we would be more likely to achieve what is right and beneficial. However, truth and goodness are subjective and vary greatly in opinions, making it impossible to discuss them with mathematical precision. Furthermore, people judge best in areas they have extensive experience in, so the young, whether in age or passionate pursuits, will gain little from what is taught here. Both philosophers and ordinary people agree that good refers to happiness. However, different individuals think happiness could mean wealth, honor, or other things, and it may change over time. Our focus should be on whether we are moving closer or farther away from fundamental principles. Common people tend to equate happiness with pleasure, while more refined individuals link it to honor and virtue. Nevertheless, we can be certain that making money itself is not the ultimate good, it is merely a means to acquire other things. Socrates complicated the search for the good by introducing the concept of the form of the good. However, we must prioritize truth above our friendships. The good is not a single entity, and even eternity cannot be the ultimate good, as something enduring is not inherently better than something that perishes quickly. Let us focus on good things rather than useful things and examine whether they are considered good based on a single idea. The good is the ultimate end we pursue in life. Unlike horses or animals, humans possess a rational soul, and the function of a good person involves using their rational abilities wisely. This is a rough initial sketch of the concept of good, and starting is already halfway to completing the task. There are three types of goods: external goods, goods of the soul, and goods of the body. The goods of the soul, including a person's actions, are the most important. We must inquire whether happiness can be learned, comes from divine providence, or is a matter of chance. Even if happiness is not a gift from the gods, it still holds a divine quality, and attributing it to mere chance would diminish its significance. Happiness requires a full human life and is beyond the reach of animals or untutored children. Should we only determine whether a life was happy after it has ended? A truly virtuous person can make the best use of whatever circumstances fate throws their way, regardless of changes in fortune. Happiness is somewhat dependent on one's friends and relationships. Is happiness something that is praised or valued? Things are praised for their relation to something else. For example, we praise a good person or a good athlete because their actions align with what we call good. Similarly, when we praise the gods, it is not based on our limited standards. Pleasure, like God, is not something praised but cherished. We can define happiness as an activity of the soul that aligns with virtue. In studying politics, one must examine human virtue to improve and perfect it. Just as humans have both body and soul, the soul consists of a rational and irrational principle, and ethics encompass both intellectual and moral principles. Book 2I. Intellectual virtue largely comes from learning, while ethical virtues are mainly developed through habit. They are not inherent in us but are qualities we are naturally inclined to acquire. Through practice, we can learn virtue, just as a builder learns to build. However, our interest lies not in the definition of virtue but in how to cultivate it. We know that deficiencies and excesses can lead to the destruction of things. Like the body needing food and exercise, temperance and courage also require the right balance to be practiced effectively. A sign of character is the pleasure or pain that follows from our actions. For instance, someone who takes pleasure in facing terrors with bravery is courageous, while someone who is pained by them is a coward. These lessons, as Plato said, should have been learned from a young age. Thus, for every virtue, there is a corresponding vice falling into three categories: noble and base, advantageous and injurious, and pleasant and painful. We become just by performing just actions and temperate by engaging in temperate acts. But what does this mean? Let's consider craft skills for better understanding. For instance, a grammarian exhibits grammatical proficiency when they apply their knowledge of grammar in their work. Craft skills, like grammarians' products, possess inherent goodness, but actions are performed with a purpose. It is evident that someone who acts must have knowledge, make a choice about their action, and act in accordance with their character. So, just actions are those that a just person performs, but most people only talk about this concept theoretically, much like how they might listen to their doctor but not follow their advice. We must delve into the concept of virtue. The soul consists of three elements: passions, faculties, and character. Therefore, virtue must belong to one of these. Passions are feelings accompanied by pleasure or pain when they are too weak or too intense, such as appetite, fear, confidence, or joy. We are not deemed good or virtuous solely based on our passions, as we do not choose them. Virtue is a matter of choice. Furthermore, virtue cannot be a faculty because we are not praised or blamed merely for feeling a particular way. Hence, it must be related to character. But what kind of state is virtue in terms of character? Every virtue leads to excellence in some aspect. Similar to how the excellence of an eye enables us to see well or the excellence of a horse allows it to run well, the virtue of a person lies in making their actions good. Everything that can be variable can have an excess or deficiency, and there is always a middle ground between these extremes. For example, 6 is the middle point between 10 and 2. However, when considering food, if 10 pounds are too much and 2 pounds are too little, it doesn't mean that a trainer would suggest the athlete eat 6 pounds. That might be too much for a beginner but too little for a seasoned athlete like Milo. The master of any art avoids excess and deficiency and aims for the middle ground, the intermediate, tailored to the individual. However, there are many ways to fail, but only one way to succeed, as evil, according to Pythagoras, knows no bounds, while good is limited. Therefore, we can say that virtue is a state of character achieved through rational choice, finding a middle path relative to the individual. Not every action has a middle ground, though. Acts like adultery, spite, and envy are bad, regardless of being done in small or large amounts, whereas temperance and courage are always good. Let's apply this understanding to specific examples. Too much confidence becomes rashness, too little becomes cowardice. Too much generosity turns into prodigality, while too little results in meanness. Excessive honor leads to vanity, and insufficient honor leads to undue humility. An excessive sense of humor leads to buffoonery, while lacking humor results in boorishness. Righteous indignation represents the middle ground between envy and spite. Thus, there are three types of dispositions, one leaning towards excess, another towards deficiency, and the virtuous mean. Each is opposed to the others in a sense, as bravery may seem like rashness to a coward and cowardice to a rash person. However, the virtuous mean is not always the literal middle point. Rashness is closer to courage than cowardice. Being virtuous is not easy, just like finding the middle ground is challenging. Even locating the center of a circle requires skill. Anyone can experience anger or be generous, but doing so with the right person, to the appropriate extent, at the right time, for the right reasons, and in the right manner is difficult. It is best to aim for the mean by avoiding the vice that opposes it the most and guard against the vices to which we are most inclined. Above all, we must be cautious about pleasure because it is challenging to judge it impartially. Book 3. Only actions that we choose to undertake voluntarily are subject to praise or blame, while involuntary actions are pardoned or elicited pity. Involuntary actions are those done under compulsion or due to ignorance, where the driving force comes from outside the individual, and they are carried along as if by the wind. However, actions performed out of fear, such as when an evil tyrant commands people to do wicked things, or bad deeds done for a noble purpose, are somewhat mixed but perhaps closer to voluntary actions. Let's explore the concept of choice, as it reveals one's character more than mere actions do. Both children and animals exhibit voluntary behavior, as they experience desires and anger, but they cannot be said to make rational choices. A choice is not just a wish or an opinion, as one might wish for immortality or for a particular athlete to win a competition. Wishes pertain to the ends, while choices are about the means, and opinions come before both. Do we always deliberate about everything? No, nobody makes decisions about fundamental aspects of the material universe or chance events like the weather because we cannot control them. For instance, a doctor doesn't deliberate whether he should heal or not, nor does an orator deliberate whether he should persuade or not, nor does a statesman deliberate whether he should bring order or not. Decision-making seems to be concerned with means, not ends. Wishes are directed toward an end, either what is truly good or what appears to be good. Those who claim that wishes are always for what is good must admit that this is not always the case, since many people wish for bad things. On the other hand, those who argue that wishes are for what appears to be good will acknowledge that there is no objective good, and each individual determines their own version of it. Hence, different types of characters have their own ideas of what is noble and pleasant. If the end is what we wish for, then the means become the focus of our deliberation. Our virtue lies in choosing the right means. Therefore, if we have the power to act nobly, we also have the power to do evil. The statement, "Nobody is voluntarily wicked or unhappy," seems uncertain, as no one chooses to be unhappy, but wickedness is indeed a voluntary act. This is evident when both magistrates and the public punish voluntary wickedness, pardon involuntary errors, and honor noble acts. We do not punish ignorance unless the individual is the cause of their own ignorance, like doubling the penalty for crimes committed while drunk, since one can choose not to get drunk. However, some individuals voluntarily create their own ignorance by being unjust or indulgent. Similarly, we do not blame but rather pity physical disabilities such as blindness or disabilities, but we would blame someone who becomes blind due to their own drunkenness. In all cases, the vices that are blamed must be within our own control. Now, let's examine several virtues, starting with courage. Courage is the middle ground between fear and confidence. A brave person should fear disgrace, and someone who lacks this fear is shameless. There are certain things, like poverty and disease, that perhaps we should not fear since they are not within our control. The truly brave person has conquered the greatest fear of all, the fear of death. Specifically, the noblest death, which is death in battle, honored by the state. The brave person is the one who faces their fears nobly, for the right reasons, in the right manner, and at the right time. To do this excessively is rashness, while doing it too little is cowardice. Courage falls within the realm of bravery, and there are 5 other aspects to consider. First is the courage of citizen soldiers, which is closest to true courage as it stems from virtue, the desire for honor, and the fear of disgrace, all of which are noble qualities. Second, there is the idea of courage as knowledge, but this is not entirely accurate, as a knowledgeable person may still be a coward. Third, passionate enthusiasm is often mistaken for courage, but even wild animals display such enthusiasm. Fourth, the sanguine man may appear brave, but his willingness to face sudden alarms comes from his nature, not from noble deliberation. Fifth, those who are ignorant of danger may seem brave, but it is only due to their ignorance. The brave person fears death and wounds but still chooses noble deeds in war because the exercise of virtue is not always pleasant, but its end is worthwhile. That covers courage. Now, let's discuss temperance, which deals with bodily pleasures. However, we don't call music lovers, art enthusiasts, or perfume aficionados intemperate. The grossest pleasures are those related to touch and taste, as even dogs enjoy the taste of a hair. Some desires appear to be universal, such as the desire for food and sex. However, different people desire different foods and have varying sexual preferences. These natural appetites only go wrong when done to excess, like the glutton who is belly mad. Individual pleasures can also go wrong in several ways. People may take delight in the wrong things, with excessive intensity, or in the wrong manner. Engaging in all 3 is clearly self-indulgence. The temperate person finds the middle ground, desiring the right things in moderation. Self-indulgence is a more voluntary fault than cowardice, since the former is driven by pleasure, while the latter is driven by pain. Self-indulgence is childish, and just as an obedient child should follow their tutor's guidance, the temperate person should be guided by their rational intellect in handling their passions. Book 4I. Now, let's discuss liberality or generosity. Liberality involves the use of wealth, while prodigality is an excess of liberality, and meanness is its deficiency. Next, we will explore magnificence, which also deals with wealth, but on a grander scale. Deficiency in magnificence is niggardliness, while excess is tasteless vulgarity. To give grandly requires artistic skill in choosing the appropriate expenditure that brings honor without appearing showy. Paying for services to the gods or furnishing one's house well is always honorable, but the level of grandeur should be relative to the cause. Even a simple oil flask can be a great gift to a child. To err in magnificence is a vice, though a harmless one. Having proper pride and self-respect is a commendable quality. Someone who thinks highly of themselves when they are unworthy is vain. On the other hand, a person who thinks less of themselves than they truly deserve is unduly humble. The one with proper pride possesses nobility and a good character. They respond with moderation to both good and bad fortune and appear somewhat indifferent to power and wealth. They willingly help others but feel ashamed to receive favors. They are not showy in their actions but perform significant deeds. They speak and act openly and quickly forgive wrongs. They avoid gossip and are sparing in giving praise and blame. Proper pride is also reflected in their measured pace, deep voice, and unhurried speech. Vain individuals, however, tend to adorn themselves with fancy clothes and seek praise for mere good luck. Those with undue humility deprive themselves of the recognition they truly deserve, but they can be seen as mistaken rather than bad. Similar to liberality, it appears that honor can be desired excessively or inadequately. We criticize both the overly ambitious person for seeking honor excessively and the unambitious person for being unwilling to be honored, even for noble reasons. In this case, the extremes seem contradictory since the mean lacks a specific name. Good temper or mildness lies between extremes concerning anger. A person who is angry at the right things, with the right people, and in the right manner is praiseworthy. If they make any mistake, it is to have too little anger towards things that deserve anger. Quick-tempered individuals become angry too easily, but their anger also dissipates quickly, which is a positive trait. On the other hand, bitter and sulky individuals suppress their anger, causing trouble for themselves and their friends. However, to slightly deviate from righteous anger is not blameworthy. Sometimes, we even praise a deficiency of anger as patience, and a slight excess as manliness. Let's move on from the topic of anger. In daily life, some people excessively agree with everyone to please them, while others rudely oppose everything just for the sake of it. Both behaviors are blameworthy. The middle ground here lacks a specific name but closely resembles friendliness. Such an amiable person is kind not only to their friends but also to others, regardless of whether they like or dislike them. The mean between boastfulness and understatement does not have a specific name. Truthfulness is commendable, but it is praiseworthy only when a person practices it consistently in both minor and significant matters. The boaster may be seen as vain rather than inherently bad, as long as they seek only reputation. However, when they boast of valuable skills they do not possess, like the powers of a clairvoyant or physician, they become a very unlikable character. The mock-modest person appears more attractive, as they disdain things that bring them reputation, much like Socrates used to do. In the art of conversation, there is also a middle ground. Those who take jokes too far and are willing to spread slander for a laugh are vulgar buffoons. On the other hand, those who cannot tell or appreciate a joke are boorish and dull. The person who finds the middle ground can listen well and engage in cultured wit. Shame, the fear of dishonor, is not a virtue but more of a feeling. It is worthy only in the young, who are driven by desires and need the restraint of shame. Now, let's discuss justice. Book 5. When people talk about justice, they generally refer to the character that inclines individuals to act justly, while injustice refers to the opposite disposition. Abilities or faculties can be used for good or ill, but a state of character, like health, does not give rise to its opposite, which is illness. Understanding character is helpful by knowing its contrary. Lawlessness and avarice are considered unjust, so law-abiding and fairness are considered just. As avarice is regarded as unjust, justice is, to some extent, related to goods. People often pray for good things, but they should instead pray for what is genuinely good for them since different things are good for different individuals. Justice itself is the complete virtue in its fullest sense and is unique among the virtues as it is directed towards others. It is evident that a person who commits adultery due to desire is simply licentious, but one who does so for gain is unjust. Similarly, the wickedness of violence arises from anger, and desertion in battle is due to cowardice, but these acts become unjust when done for gain. Specific acts of injustice are related to the pursuit of money or honor, while universal justice is found in virtuous conduct. Injustice can be associated with unlawfulness, but the two do not always align. Particular acts of justice deal with the distribution of money or honor or the restoration of relationships between individuals. Rectification can occur voluntarily, as in sales, loans, or agreements, or involuntarily and secretly, as in theft, adultery, enslavement, robbery, or murder. The notion that justice is a sort of middle way does not require much argument to support it. Justice is a type of proportion, an equality of ratios where A, B is equal to B, C. This mathematical concept of geometric proportion is one form of justice. The remaining type of justice is rectificatory, which corrects errors in distribution. This occurs in transactions where someone has experienced injustice, like a blow or an unequal division. In such cases, the judge, symbolizing justice, seeks to restore equality by imposing penalties or taking from the one who has more and giving to the one who has less. For example, if line AA2 is unequal to line BB2, segment AC can be taken from it and added to BB2. Some, like the Pythagoreans, believe that simple reciprocity is justice, but this concept doesn't fit with either distributive or rectificatory justice. For instance, if someone is struck by an official, it would be wrong to strike back. However, if they strike an official, it is right to have them struck back and punished. Nonetheless, fair exchange relies on reciprocity, which is why we have the Temple of the Graces. Proportional return requires cross-conjunction, where the value of a house is proportionally related to the value of a shoe for a builder and a shoemaker to engage in a fair exchange. Money serves as the standard for measuring all commodities, even though it is a custom and not a natural entity. Is it possible to act unjustly without being an unjust person? For example, a man may commit adultery under the influence of passion but not out of choice. Committing a wrongful act, such as stealing or adultery, does not define a person as a thief or an adulterer. Our focus here is on political justice, which exists only among those whose relations are regulated by law. The ruler plays a significant role in ensuring justice, and when he becomes dissatisfied with honor and dignity as rewards and takes more than he deserves, he becomes a despot. Injustice cannot be committed against one's possessions, children, or oneself. Justice can exist between husband and wife and within families, but this is not political justice. Political justice can be either natural or legal. Natural justice remains the same everywhere, independent of people's opinions, while laws can vary significantly. Among the gods, justice is presumably immutable, but in our world, everything is subject to change, except for the one natural form of government, which is the best. There are three types of injury: misadventure, which happens contrary to reasonable expectation; mistake, which might be expected but is done without malice; and intentional harm, which is unjust and wicked. Mistakes committed in ignorance and from ignorance are pardonable, while those committed in ignorance but due to unnatural passions are inexcusable. Can a person suffer injustice willingly? At first, this seems strange, but people can be treated justly even when they do not desire it. Thus, we must add "against the will of the other" to the formula, doing harm to another, with knowledge of the other, of the instrument, and of the manner. However, no one wills what they do not consider good. Being treated unjustly must, therefore, be involuntary. Two questions remain. Is the person who receives too large a share or the one who gives it guilty? Also, can inanimate objects or slaves, acting under their master's command, do something unjust without being unjust themselves? Legal and natural justice differ in this regard, as some actions may be wrong legally but not unjust inherently. Skill lies in using them in a particular way, much like in medicine where anyone can know what hellebore or surgery is, but the skill lies in their proper application. Sometimes we commend the equitable as good, but at other times, it may seem unjust. However, there is no contradiction here, at least in laws, for the error lies not in the law but in the nature of the specific case. When an exceptional circumstance arises that the lawmaker hasn't anticipated, it is right for the judge to act as the lawmaker would have if they knew the circumstances. Equity, though just, is not superior to natural justice. Instead, it is like the flexible rulers used by lesbian architects, allowing laws to be adapted to fit the circumstances. It should now be evident whether a person can treat themselves unjustly. If a man kills himself, he acts unjustly. But towards whom? It is towards the state that a person owes duty, so if they take their own life, the state rightfully dishonors them. However, one cannot commit adultery with their own wife or burgle their own house. Both being treated unjustly and acting unjustly are evils, as the former is to have less and the latter to have more than the mean. But acting unjustly is worse because it is voluntary. This concludes our analysis of justice. Book 6. We have already mentioned that one should aim at the mean between deficiency and excess, as dictated by the right principle. But understanding only this is not enough, we need to discover what the right principle is. Let's begin by recognizing that the soul has a rational and an irrational part. We can further divide the rational part into the scientific, dealing with invariable things, and the calculative, dealing with the variable. In the soul, three factors control actions: sensation, intellect, and appetite. Since moral virtue involves choice, and choice is deliberate appetite, the reasoning behind the choice must be true, and the desire must be right for it to be good. Action originates from choice, and choice arises from appetite and purposive reasoning. However, no process is set in motion by mere thought. Only practical thought leads to action. When someone creates something, they do it for a purpose, related to a specific end. But action itself is an end, and man is the union of reason and appetite. Past events are not objects of choice, hence, Agathon was right to say, "One thing is denied even to God, to undo what has been already done." To delve deeper, we can identify 5 ways in which the soul arrives at truth through affirmation or denial: art, science, prudence, wisdom, and intuition. Judgment and opinion, however, may often be prone to error and are not included in this list. Science seeks knowledge of the eternal and is supposed to be teachable. Teaching always starts from what is already known, either by inductive reasoning from first principles or by deductive reasoning from those principles. This is our understanding of scientific knowledge. Art, or craft skill, involves bringing something into existence, with the cause being reasoned in the producer's mind, not in the product itself. Art is distinct from action and contains an element of chance, as Agathon said, "Art loves chance, and chance loves art." To understand prudence, or practical wisdom, we should consider the type of person we call prudent. A prudent individual is capable of deliberating rightly, not just about specific matters like health, but about the good life in general. As prudence is not fixed and unchanging, it cannot be considered a science. It is also not aimed at production, so it is not an art. Prudence is, therefore, a virtue and belongs to the calculative, reasoning part of the soul. However, it is not merely a rational state, as it cannot be forgotten, unlike other rational states. Let us now consider intuition. All science stems from certain first principles, which cannot themselves be comprehended by science, art, prudence, or even wisdom. The state of mind that apprehends these first principles is intuition. When we refer to Phidias as a wise sculptor or Polyclitus as a wise portraitist, we mean they possess artistic wisdom. Some people are not wise at something, but simply wise without any qualification. Wisdom, therefore, appears to be the most complete form of knowledge. It is the scientific and intuitive knowledge of what is most precious by nature. That's why a wise person can often be more effective in action than someone with specialized knowledge. Prudence and political science represent the same state of mind but are realized differently. Someone who knows and provides for their own interests is called prudent, while politicians are often viewed as meddling busybodies. However, it is impossible to secure one's own good without a sound political structure surrounding them. Prudence is not a science because it apprehends the last step, while intuition apprehends the first definitions. We must try to understand the nature of deliberation, as it is not the same as inquiry. It is also not mere conjecture, as it takes time, whereas conjecture is swift. It's true that a person who deliberates poorly may make mistakes, but a wicked person can deliberate effectively to achieve an evil end. Therefore, good deliberation is that which succeeds in relation to a particular goal. There is also understanding, which is distinct from scientific knowledge or opinion. It is not like prudence, which deals with what one should or should not do. Understanding only makes judgments, as there is no distinction between good and bad understanding. Judgment is the ability to judge what is equitable correctly. Equitable judgment is compassionate judgment. These states of mind naturally tend to converge, so we may call someone understanding, prudent, or intelligent almost interchangeably. However, we should pay more attention to the opinions of older, more experienced individuals, even without factual evidence, because age brings intuitive reason and judgment. What is the purpose of the intellectual virtues? They concern the just, the admirable, and the good, but knowing them does not necessarily mean they are put into practice. Just as one can possess knowledge of medicine or physical training without actively practicing it. Wisdom and prudence, being virtues, are desirable in themselves, even without any immediate result. Yet, in reality, they do yield a result. Wisdom is a virtue that brings happiness to a person through its possession. We must also consider cleverness, which is the ability to achieve an aim. The aim can be noble or base, which is why we may call both prudent and unscrupulous people clever. Prudence, however, is distinct, as insight cannot lead to prudence without some underlying virtue. Now, we must re-evaluate virtue. If we have a natural disposition towards justice, temperance, or courage, it is inborn, but moral qualities are acquired. Some, like Socrates, claim that all virtues are forms of prudence. But we should go further and state that virtue is not merely a state conforming to the right principle but is inseparable from it. At the same time, prudence does not utilize wisdom but allows it to be realized. To suggest otherwise would be like claiming that the state controls the gods because it oversees rituals. Book 7. There are 3 states of character to be avoided: vice, incontinence, and brutishness. The opposite of vice is virtue, and of incontinence is continence. The opposite of brutishness is something akin to superhuman virtue, as Homer describes Hector. Nor did he seem, son of a mortal sire, but of a god. However, just as divinity is rare among men, true brutishness is also uncommon, though it is more prevalent among non-Greeks. Now, let's discuss incontinence, effeminacy, and endurance. Socrates claimed that nobody knowingly acts against what is best, except through ignorance. However, this contradicts the evidence, as we often see people acting on the impulse of desire against their knowledge and judgment. Furthermore, the sophists deceive people with intricate arguments, leading them to believe that what is good is actually bad. We must consider whether incontinent people act knowingly or unknowingly, whether the incontinent person behaves that way due to circumstances or attitude. Firstly, a person doing wrong without reflecting on their own knowledge is very different from acting with that knowledge. Secondly, there are 2 types of practical knowledge that serve as starting points for actions: universal knowledge about things and particular knowledge about how to act upon them. But a person may possess both without drawing the correct conclusion. For instance, someone might know that savory food is more wholesome than sweet, and also, wholesome food should be eaten, but they may not connect the dots and choose to eat savory foods. Thirdly, we may assume that incontinent people are akin to those who are asleep, drunk, mentally disturbed, or in the grip of strong emotions or cravings, who speak and act without knowledge. Fourth, even if a person knows both the universal and particular premises, their natural desires may sway their scientific judgment. Is anyone absolutely incontinent, or is it only in specific respects? It is evident that continence or incontinence are related to pleasures and pains. Some pleasures, like food and sex, are necessary, while others, like victory, honor, or wealth, are merely desirable. Those who are incontinent in the latter type are not simply labeled incontinent. We add qualifiers such as in respect of money, or something similar. People are not blamed for liking such things, they are only faulted for pursuing them to excess, like Satyrus's excessive infatuation with his father. Some things are not naturally pleasant but can become so through injury, habit, or congenital depravity. And for each unnatural pleasure, there is an abnormal state of character. For example, there is a brutish character, as seen in tribes around the Black Sea that eat human flesh. Additionally, there are morbid states, like nail-biting or homosexuality, which may arise naturally in some individuals or be acquired through habit, such as when someone has been sexually misused as a child. In cases where nature is the cause, we do not blame people for incontinence. But those who are congenitally incapable of reason, we call brutish, and those troubled by illness, we call morbid. Let us consider if incontinence of temper, which is anger, is different from incontinence of desire. Unlike desire, temper seems to have some reason to it but does not fully listen, acting prematurely like an over-eager servant who rushes off before receiving complete instructions. When reason informs someone that they are being insulted, temper perceives that person as an enemy. Being guided by natural appetites, which we all share to some extent, is partly excusable. However, incontinence of desire is a vice, as it is driven by pleasure. We do not condemn animals as intemperate or licentious because they lack choice and calculation. Thus, while brutishness may be frightening, it does not corrupt the highest reasoning. A bad person can cause much more harm than a brute. We have noted that some pleasures are necessary, but only up to a certain point. The person who pursues excessive pleasures is licentious because they are uncontrolled. On the other hand, the person who lacks appreciation for pleasures is the opposite of licentious, while the temperate person falls between the two extremes. The crucial difference lies in whether one acts by choice or not. We generally think worse of someone who carefully plans and then harms others than of someone who acts impulsively in a fit of anger. The person who cannot endure everyday pains is soft and effeminate, unless their weakness is due to some congenital defect, like the hereditary effeminacy of Scythian aristocrats. Similarly, the lover of constant amusement is often considered licentious, but they are actually soft, as amusement becomes excessive indulgence in relaxation. In general, vice is unconscious, while incontinence is not. Hence, incontinence is not vice, and the incontinent are not wicked, although they may do wicked things. The incontinent person is one who is driven by feelings to deviate from the right principle but is not fully controlled to pursue such pleasures unrestrainedly. We must ask whether virtue consists of abiding by any choice or principle or only by following the right one. Some people stubbornly cling to their opinions, and we call them obstinate. They can be divided into the opinionated, the ignorant, and the boorish. The opinionated are motivated by pleasure and pain and enjoy a sense of superiority, resembling the incontinent. Both the incontinent and the licentious person pursue bodily pleasures, but the former knows it is wrong while the latter does not. The prudent person is morally good. However, simply knowing what is right does not make a person prudent, they must be inclined to actually do it. The incontinent person lacks this inclination. They are like a state that has good laws but fails to enforce them, while the bad person is like a state that enforces its bad laws. So, is pleasure good? Some argue that pleasure is not good because it hinders thinking. Others point out that some pleasures are disgraceful or harmful, and some say pleasure cannot be the supreme good because it is not an end but a process. This does not prove that pleasure is not good. Things can be called good either absolutely or good for somebody. A good can be either an activity or a condition. The argument that there must be something better than pleasure because the end is superior to the process is not conclusive because pleasures are a type of activity and can be an end. The argument against pleasures being good because some pleasant things are harmful is weak, similar to saying that healthy things are bad because some of them are costly. However, it is evident that the pleasures of animals and children are not good. Pain is undoubtedly an evil that should be avoided. As the opposite of pain is pleasure, it must be considered good. When Speusippus argued that good is contrary to both pleasure and pain, he cannot be correct because he refused to acknowledge that pleasure can be an evil. People may pursue different pleasures, but it is always pleasure that they seek. Those who believe that some noble pleasures are highly desirable, but bodily pleasures are not, should consider why, in that case, the pains that are contrary to noble pleasures are bad, for the contrary of a bad thing is a good one. Everyone enjoys tasty food, wine, and sex to some extent, but not everyone in the right degree. Conversely, the bad person avoids not only excessive pain but all pain. Pleasure can drive out pain, but our nature contains different elements that are rarely in perfect balance. Only God could experience one simple pleasure indefinitely. Book 8. Friendship is a type of virtue or implies virtue. It is essential for living, as nobody would choose to live without friends. In youth, friends prevent us from making mistakes, and in old age, they care for us. In the prime of life, they encourage us. Friendship is the bond that holds communities together. Some believe, like Empedocles, that like is drawn to like, while others, like Heraclitus, argue that opposition unites. But these matters can be explored further at a later time. It might be helpful to define what an object of affection is. Is it the good that people love, or only what is good for them? Sometimes, these two aspects conflict. We don't speak of friendship regarding our affection for inanimate objects because there is no reciprocation of affection. It would be absurd for a person to wish for the well-being of their wine. There are 3 types of friendship. Some people, especially the elderly or ambitious, love for the sake of utility, seeking to derive benefits from the friendship. Sometimes, such individuals may not even like each other, as is the case with friendships between foreigners. Those who love for the sake of pleasure are driven by their own enjoyment. This is most common among the young and in romantic relationships. Such friendships can rise and fall rapidly. Only the friendship between those who are genuinely good is perfect, but this kind of friendship is rare since truly good individuals are not common. In friendships based on pleasure, as beauty or pleasurable qualities fade, the friendship often fades as well. Pleasure or utility-based friendships can exist between 2 bad individuals, but friendships for their own sake require both individuals to be good. Friends who spend time together mutually benefit from the relationship. When they are apart or distant, they still retain the disposition to be friends. However, if the absence is prolonged, it can lead to forgetting the friendship, as the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind. Friendships are less likely to form among bitter and elderly people. Younger individuals become friends more quickly and easily than older ones, though older individuals may still be well disposed towards others. Having many perfect friends is no more feasible than being in love with many people at once, since love is a form of excessive friendship. Another kind of friendship involves a sense of superiority, such as the affection of a father for his son, a husband for his wife, or a master for his servant. In such cases, the affection is proportional to merit, and the better person is loved more than they love in return. There is a considerable difference in the form of affection between ordinary people and gods or royalty. This raises the question of whether friends genuinely wish the greatest goods for each other, such as becoming a god, since that would mean they would no longer be friends. It seems that a friend would wish for the best for their human companion but would likely reserve the very best for themselves. Most people seem to desire to be loved rather than to love. Honor is the validation of one's self-opinion. However, people enjoy being loved for its own sake, so it may be assumed that being loved is preferable to being honored. Friendship appears to involve more giving than receiving affection, as seen in the joy that mothers show in loving their children. Friendships of utility can exist between unequal individuals, such as the poor and the rich or the ignorant and the learned, but it is mainly based on each party gaining something in return. We might also note here the type of lovers who demand to be loved as much as they love, even though this is not directly relevant to our inquiry. There is some resemblance, as we've mentioned before, between friendship and justice, as observed in the broader community. The entire state or community, we assume, was initially formed for mutual benefit, much like how sailors come together to operate a ship, businessmen to make money, or soldiers to seek plunder or conquest. There are 3 types of political systems, and an equal number of corruptions of these systems. Monarchy is considered the best form, but it can deteriorate into tyranny when the ruler prioritizes his own interests over those of his subjects. Aristocracy can devolve into rule based on wealth, which is known as timocracy, where corrupt officials exploit the state's resources. Timocracy, in turn, can degenerate into democracy, which is not as harmful. Similar analogies can be found in households, where the relationship between fathers and sons is akin to monarchy, although in some cases, the way Persian fathers treat their sons resembles tyranny. The relationship between husband and wife clearly mirrors aristocracy, while the bond between brothers is comparable to timocracy. Democracy can be likened to a household with a weak head, allowing everyone to do as they please. In each of these political systems, there exists a form of friendship to the same extent as there is justice. There is the friendship of a king for his subjects. There is also the friendship between brothers, resembling the timocracy that unites members of a social club. In corrupted political systems, where ruler and ruled have nothing in common, friendship and justice are rarely found. Friendship between relatives appears to originate from parental affection. Parents love their children from the moment of their birth, but children come to understand this later on. Thus, mothers tend to love their children more than fathers. This love of children for parents or of humans for gods implies a relation to a superior object. Friendship between siblings is not unlike that between comrades, and friendly feelings between other relatives are proportional to the closeness of their relationship. By nature, humans tend to form pairs rather than larger social groups, and the family is a more ancient and essential institution than the state. Humans cohabit not only to procreate but also because the roles of husband and wife complement each other, ensuring the necessities of life. Children also serve as a bond between parents, which is why childless marriages often face challenges. Quarrels occur most frequently in friendships based on usefulness because each person is using the other for their own benefit. However, in friendships based on virtue, quarrels are rare because the friends genuinely care for each other's well-being. In friendships based on superiority, quarrels often arise because the superior person believes they deserve more recognition due to their status, while the inferior person believes they should receive more because of their greater need. This is particularly evident in the honor paid to parents or the gods. That concludes our discussion. Book 9. In all dissimilar friendships, there is an equitable exchange. In commercial transactions, there is a common currency, money, where the shoemaker receives something of equal value for their shoes. However, in emotional matters, such as love, one person may complain that their love is not reciprocated, or the promises made in the past are not fulfilled. Quarrels arise when the desired outcome of the friendship differs between the parties involved. Just like the story of a harpist who played well but was denied his fee because he had already received the joy of performing to an audience. If both parties seek pleasure, the friendship can succeed. But if one seeks pleasure and the other seeks gain, the friendship is likely to fail because people are eager to obtain what they truly need and are willing to give in return for that need. Should one always defer to their father? Should one trust a physician when they are ill? When voting for a general, should one choose someone with military experience? Establishing strict guidelines is not easy because no single person is entitled to deference in all matters. Repaying benefits is generally more important than spontaneous gifts. Even fathers might not be entitled to everything, just as Zeus does not receive all the sacrifices. Parents do have a special claim on their children for support, and we should honor older individuals by showing respect. When it comes to relationships with relatives, clan members, comrades, and others, we should carefully consider the different dynamics. It may not be simple, but we must do our best. When should we end a friendship? If the association was based on utility or pleasure, it is not unusual to dissolve it if the desired attributes are no longer present. When someone mistakenly believes they are loved for their character, while their friend has given no indication of such feelings, they have only themselves to blame. Deceiving others in such matters is worse than using counterfeit coins, as it involves something more valuable than money. But what about situations when one friend remains the same, while the other surpasses them in virtue? Maintaining the friendship may seem impossible. In some cases, as is common with boyhood friendships, one might show a little more favor to former friends for old time's sake. Friends. 1. Wish good for each other. 2. Hope for each other's success. 3. Spend time together. 4. Share similar interests. 5. Share in each other's sorrows and joys. Goodwill is somewhat different from friendship or affection, as we can feel goodwill towards people we do not even know. However, goodwill can be the starting point of friendship, just as seeing a person can be the beginning of love. Love emerges when one longs for someone who is absent. Generally, goodwill is sparked by merit, similar to the way we might feel towards an admired sportsman. Concord also appears to be a friendly feeling. It's not merely about agreeing on matters like the movement of stars, but more of a political sentiment where citizens work together to put common resolutions into action. However, bad individuals often fail to share the same thoughts because each one wants more than their fair share, leading to discord. Benefactors seem to love those they have helped more than the beneficiaries love their benefactors. This curiosity requires some explanation. Some may see it as a situation of debtors and creditors, where the creditor is self-interestedly concerned for the welfare of the debtor. Epicharmus called this taking the dim view, but there is some truth to the notion that people prefer being well treated rather than treating others well. It's akin to every craftsman or artist loving their own works, and people feeling stronger affection for things that required effort on their part. We criticize self-lovers, but is it inherently bad for a person to love themselves more than others? If someone consistently performs just and virtuous acts, no one would label them a self-lover. Yet, in a way, they might be, because they value what is honorable and good for themselves, and by doing virtuous deeds, they are, in fact, seeking the best for themselves. Does a happy person need friends? Why do some hold Euripides' view that, when fortune smiles, what need of others? However, a person who sees knows they are seeing. If they think, they are aware of their own existence. Being conscious of one's own life is intrinsically good, and a good person wishes the same joy for others. Therefore, for a good person, the presence of virtuous friends is almost as desirable as their own existence. How many friends should one have? Hesiod's principle that, neither let many share thy table, or none, may be true for friends through utility, and a few friends for amusement are enough, like a pinch of seasoning in food. But when it comes to friends of good character, they must also be friends with one another if they are to live together, and this becomes challenging with a large number of friends. Similarly, it is difficult to fully sympathize with the joys and sorrows of many individuals simultaneously. Finding many worthy of such love is not feasible, so we must be content with a few genuine friends. Do we need friends more in good times or bad times? Those in misfortune need help, while in good times, they seek companionship. Thus, friendship is more needed in adversity, as friends can lighten one's grief. However, a resolute person will invite friends to share in success but hesitate to involve them in misfortunes. It's true that some people enjoy sharing their complaints, but their example may be disregarded. Just as lovers delight in seeing each other, spending time together is the finest thing friends can do. Everyone wishes to share their pleasures, whether it's in drinking, playing dice, engaging in athletics, hunting, or discussing philosophy. Through such shared experiences, friends improve each other. That concludes our discussion on friendship. Book 10. Now, let's delve into the topic of pleasure, as it is closely intertwined with human nature. Some philosophers claim that pleasure is the ultimate good. Others who consider it wholly bad probably do so not out of genuine conviction but to promote self-restraint. Let's examine these views. Eudoxus believed pleasure to be the ultimate good, but his view is more admired for his character than its soundness. He argued that adding pleasure to a good thing makes it more desirable. However, this only shows that pleasure is a good thing, not the ultimate good. Plato refuted the idea that pleasure is the ultimate good, pointing out that a pleasant life is more desirable when combined with wisdom. If the mixture is better, pleasure cannot be the good, as the good cannot become more desirable by adding anything to it. Our aim is to discover what thing we all share, which cannot be made better by adding some good. The argument that pleasure is not a good is based on the notion that its opposite, evil, can be opposed by either another evil or a good. While this argument has some merit, it need not concern us here. Another claim is that pleasure and the ultimate good cannot be the same thing, as pleasures vary in degree, whereas the ultimate good cannot. Pleasure is seen as a process, like a form of motion, which can be quick or slow. Yet, regardless of its speed, pleasure is complete at every moment of enjoyment. The idea that pleasure is the replenishment of a deficiency, like relieving hunger, may be true for certain things, but the pleasure of learning, for instance, is not preceded by any pain. Some people find pleasure in disreputable things, but this likely applies only to individuals with an unhealthy disposition. Let's start anew in discussing pleasure. Like the act of seeing, pleasure is complete at any given moment. It is not like building a temple where separate components must come together to form the whole. Pleasure exists for each of our senses, and the pleasure seems most intense when our senses are at their best. Continuous pleasure may not be possible due to sensory fatigue. Pleasures of the intellect differ from those of the senses. Those who engage in activities with pleasure show better judgment and greater precision. This is evident when we observe how activities can be hindered by competing pleasures. For example, flute players might be distracted from a conversation if they hear their instrument being played, just as people who eat sweets at the theater do so most when the acting is poor. Each activity has its own proper pleasure, and the pleasure of a worthy activity is good, while that of an unworthy activity is bad. Similarly, different senses have different pleasures, and intellectual pleasures are considered superior to sensual ones. Disgraceful pleasures are not true pleasures, except to those who are morally corrupt. But what are the good pleasures of a good person? Happiness is not a mere state but an activity chosen for its own sake and self-sufficient. Happiness cannot be found in mere amusement, as even children can be amused. Amusements are a way of taking a break to work harder, for no one can work without rest. Serious pursuits are superior to comical ones, and bodily pleasures are accessible to all, even slaves. However, claiming that a mere slave could attain true happiness would be absurd, as it implies considering them equal to full human beings. If true happiness is an activity in accordance with virtue, it must be aligned with the highest virtue and the best part of a person. Contemplation is the highest aspect of human beings, and philosophical wisdom is the most pleasant and virtuous activity, remarkable in its purity and lasting nature. It is also the most self-sufficient activity, requiring nothing more to be complete. A life lived with moral virtue can lead to happiness in a secondary way, as justice and bravery are purely human concerns. However, truest happiness is found in contemplative activity. The gods, as we understand them, are supremely blessed and happy, and their sole activity is contemplation. Finally, we must consider how this knowledge can be put into practice. Some believe that people can be inherently good, while others argue that goodness must be taught. It is clear that our nature is bestowed by the divine, and teaching does not always succeed. Living a virtuous life is not easy for most people, which is why the state should encourage goodness by appealing to finer feelings and discourage evil through penalties. Unfortunately, only a few states seem to follow this approach, leaving it largely up to fathers to promote goodness within their own households. But where can a father acquire the necessary skills for this task? He needs knowledge of legislation, which is certainly not gained from the sophists, politicians, or simply studying books.